the kingdom was dying. Not from war, not from plague, but from something far more terrifying: silence. The silence of dry riverbeds where water once flowed. The silence of cracked earth that refused to yield crops. The silence of a people watching their children grow weak from thirst. And at the center of this catastrophe stood one truth that everyone whispered, but no one dared speak aloud. King Shango had abandoned them. The Lord of Thunder, the Master of Lightning, the most powerful ruler the land had ever known, had turned his back on his kingdom after a bitter conflict with the other Orishas. Warriors had been sent to plead with him. They returned empty-handed, some bearing scorch marks from his rage. Wise elders had journeyed to his mountain retreat. They came back speaking of a king consumed by pride and fury, unmoved by suffering. The kingdom needed a miracle. But what arrived was something else entirely, a plan so audacious, so dangerous, that only one goddess would dare attempt it. Oshun, the lady of sweet waters, of rivers and honey, of beauty that could break the strongest will, volunteered for a mission that would determine the fate of thousands. She would seduce a king. Not with force, not with magic alone, but with something far more powerful, the kind of desire that makes even gods forget themselves. If you believe beauty can change destiny, type Oshun in the comments below. And if you want to witness how this divine seduction unfolds, subscribe to this channel, because you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. The Council of Orishas gathered in the celestial realm, their faces grave as they discussed the crisis below. Yemoja, Mother of Waters, spoke first, her voice heavy with sorrow as she described villages where mothers could no longer produce milk for their babies. Ogun, god of iron and war, slammed his fist against the stone table, declaring that even he could not fight drought with weapons. Obatala, father of creation, stroked his white beard and reminded them all that Shango's pride had always been his greatest weakness and his greatest strength. The king had felt disrespected during a gathering of the Orishas, a perceived slight that had ignited his legendary temper. In his rage, he had withdrawn not just himself, but his blessings from the mortal realm. Without his approval, the rains would not come. Without the rains, the kingdom he once loved would perish. Every Orisha present had tried reasoning with him. Every attempt had failed. The room fell into heavy silence, until a voice like liquid honey broke through. Oshun stepped forward from the shadows, her golden jewelry catching the light, her presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. She smiled, but it was not a gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how powerful she was and had no qualms about using that power. She told the council she would bring Shango back, not through confrontation, but through something he could not resist. Ogun laughed bitterly, asking how she planned to seduce a king who had rejected everyone else. Oshun's eyes gleamed as she explained that others had approached Shango with demands, with logic, with appeals to duty. She would offer him something entirely different, herself, completely and irresistibly. The preparation was as important as the seduction itself. Oshun returned to her sacred river, the place where her power flowed strongest, where the water reflected her beauty in endless ripples of gold and amber. She bathed in honey mixed with the petals of yellow flowers, each movement deliberate, each gesture part of an ancient ritual of allure. She adorned herself with gold that seemed to melt against her skin, bracelets that chimed with every movement of her wrists, anklets that whispered promises with each step. Her hair was woven with threads of copper and decorated with cowrie shells that symbolized wealth and fertility. She painted her lips with red earth mixed with palm oil, creating a color that drew the eye and held it captive. But Oshun knew that physical beauty alone would not be enough. Shango was a king, a god of immense power who had seen countless beautiful beings. She needed to embody something deeper, the promise of peace after storm, the sweetness after bitterness, the cool water after burning fire. She practiced her dance, movements that flowed like rivers, that swayed like reeds in the wind, that promised comfort and excitement in equal measure. She rehearsed her voice, finding the exact tone that could soothe anger while igniting desire, that could sound submissive while maintaining absolute control. Every detail mattered, because failure meant the death of thousands. As the sun set over her river, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Oshun looked at her reflection one final time and spoke a truth that sent ripples across the water. She would save the kingdom, no matter what it cost her. The mountain where Shango had exiled himself was a fortress of solitude and rage. Lightning cracked across the dark sky above it even though no rain fell, a manifestation of the king's inner turmoil. The path leading up was scorched and treacherous, lined with the remnants of those who had attempted to reach him. Oshun climbed it barefoot, feeling the hot stones beneath her feet, letting them test her resolve. She did not hide her approach. Instead, she announced herself with song, her voice carrying through the thin mountain air like a golden thread weaving through darkness. The melody spoke of rivers that longed to flow, of earth that dreamed of rain, of a beauty that could only be fully appreciated by someone powerful enough to protect it. Shango heard it from his throne of stone and fire, and for the first time in weeks, something other than anger flickered across his face. Curiosity. When Oshun finally reached the summit, she found him exactly as she had imagined, magnificent and terrible, his eyes holding the storm, his body radiating barely controlled power. He sat with his double-headed axe across his lap, the symbol of his authority and his wrath. He did not stand when she approached. He did not soften his expression. He simply stared at her with eyes that had seen through countless manipulations and asked her what made her think she would succeed where everyone else had failed. Oshun did not answer with words. She began to dance. Her body moved with the fluidity of water, finding its path, inevitable and unstoppable. The gold on her skin caught the firelight, creating patterns that hypnotized. Her feet traced circles on the stone floor, and where she stepped, small flowers began to bloom. Impossible flowers growing from solid rock. Shango watched, and despite himself, despite his determination to remain unmoved, he felt something shift inside his chest. This was not the aggressive persuasion of warriors or the tedious logic of elders. This was something that spoke to a part of him he had buried beneath layers of pride and anger, the part that still remembered joy, that still craved connection, that still yearned for something beyond power. Oshun danced closer, her movements now telling a story without words. She showed him loneliness through the curve of her spine. She expressed longing through the reach of her arms. She demonstrated strength through the firm placement of her feet. And then, as her dance reached its crescendo, she stopped directly before him, close enough that he could smell the honey and flowers that clung to her skin, close enough that he could see the genuine emotion in her eyes. She spoke then, her voice soft but clear, telling him that she understood his anger, that she knew what it felt like to be underestimated and disrespected. But she also knew something he seemed to have forgotten, that true power was not about standing alone on a mountain while everything below died. True power was having the strength to return, to forgive, to be the king his people desperately needed. Shango's grip on his axe tightened. He wanted to rage at her, to send her away with thunder and lightning. But something in her words, in her presence, in the way she looked at him, without fear, but with something that looked almost like understanding, made him hesitate. And in that hesitation, Oshun saw her opening. We're halfway through this incredible story, and the best part is yet to come. If you're captivated by how Oshun is slowly breaking through Shango's defenses, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The resistance Shango had built around himself was formidable, constructed from wounded pride and genuine grievance. He rose from his throne, towering over Oshun, and demanded to know why he should care about a kingdom that allowed him to be humiliated. His voice shook the mountain as he recounted the incident at the gathering, how Obatala had dismissed his opinion, how the other Orishes had laughed when he had reacted with anger, how he had been treated like a temperamental child rather than a king. The words poured out of him with the force of a storm that had been building for too long. Oshun listened without interruption, without judgment, letting him release the poison that had been festering inside. When he finally fell silent, breathing heavily from the exertion of his rage, she moved closer still. She placed her hand gently on his arm, and he felt the coolness of her touch against his burning skin. She told him she understood because she too had been underestimated, dismissed as merely beautiful, when she possessed wisdom and power that ran deeper than any river. She shared her own stories of being overlooked in council, of having her ideas attributed to others, of fighting to be seen as more than just an ornament to the divine realm. As she spoke, Shango found himself listening not with the ears of a king, but with the ears of someone who had finally found an equal. Oshun continued, weaving her words with the skill of someone who understood that truth could be more seductive than any lie. She acknowledged that he had been wronged, that his anger was justified. But she also painted pictures with her words. Children with distended bellies from hunger, mothers weeping over dry wells, elderly people lying down in the dust to die because they had given their last water to the young. She described how the kingdom that had once chanted his name in celebration now spoke it only in whispered prayers for mercy. She made him see that his absence was not teaching the other Orishas a lesson. It was only punishing those who had no part in his humiliation. Shango turned away from her, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. He was being torn between two impulses, the desire to maintain his pride and the growing realization that his revenge was destroying innocent lives. Oshun could sense the internal battle raging within him. She changed her approach, her voice becoming softer, more intimate. She asked him if he remembered what it felt like to be loved by his people, to walk through villages where children ran to him with joy, where farmers offered him the first fruits of their harvest in genuine gratitude. She reminded him of festivals held in his honor, of the pride he once took in being not just a powerful god, but a beloved king. She painted a vision of his return, not as a defeat, but as an act of magnanimous strength, a king choosing mercy over revenge, power over pettiness. As she spoke, she moved around him in a slow circle, her presence enveloping him like water surrounding a stone. Shango felt his resolve weakening, felt the anger that had sustained him for weeks beginning to dissolve in the presence of this goddess who seemed to understand him better than he understood himself. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just beauty but intelligence, not just seduction but genuine concern. And in that moment, something cracked in the fortress he had built around his heart. The night deepened around them, and the fire burning in Shango's throne room cast dancing shadows on the walls. Oshun sensed that the moment had arrived, the point where words alone would no longer suffice. She needed to show him vulnerability, to make him feel that this was not merely a political mission, but something personal, something that mattered to her beyond duty. She sat beside him, not at his feet as a supplicant but next to him as an equal, and she did something unexpected. She let her own mask slip. She told him about her fears, how she worried that she would fail, that the kingdom would die, that she would be remembered not as a savior, but as another goddess who had tried and lost. Her voice, usually so controlled, carried a tremor of genuine emotion. She confessed that she had volunteered for this mission not just because she believed she could succeed, but because she could not bear to watch suffering without trying to stop it. She revealed that she too knew what it meant to carry the weight of expectations, to be seen as strong when sometimes she felt fragile, to be viewed as always certain when sometimes she was filled with doubt. Shango found himself listening to these confessions with surprise. He had expected seduction, manipulation, the usual tricks of those who wanted something from him. What he had not expected was honesty. Oshun turned to face him fully, and in the firelight, he saw tears glistening in her eyes. Real tears that she made no effort to hide. She told him that she was not there to trick him or to manipulate him into doing what the other Orishas wanted. She was there because she believed in him, because she knew that beneath the anger and pride was a king who genuinely cared about his people. She said that she was offering him not just a return to his kingdom, but a return to himself, to the part of him that found joy in protection rather than punishment. And then, with a boldness that took even Shango by surprise, she took his hand and placed it over her heart, letting him feel it beating rapidly beneath his palm. She whispered that she was afraid of failing, afraid of what would happen if he refused, afraid of admitting that somewhere in this mission of seduction, her own feelings had become complicated and real. Shango felt something he had not felt in a very long time, a desire not for conquest but for connection. The goddess before him was not just beautiful, but brave, not just seductive, but sincere. He reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek, his rough thumb tender against her smooth skin. In that simple gesture, something fundamental shifted between them. The walls of anger and pride that had seemed impenetrable began to crumble, not with the force of lightning, but with the persistent gentleness of water wearing away stone. They sat together in silence for a long moment, two powerful beings allowing themselves to be vulnerable with each other. And in that vulnerability, Oshun found her victory, not through seduction alone, but through something far more powerful: genuine human connection between divine beings. As dawn began to break over the mountain, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Shango finally spoke the words that would change everything. He told Oshun he would return, but his pride demanded conditions. He would not simply appear in his kingdom as if nothing had happened, as if he had been summoned back like a servant. He required a public acknowledgement from the other Orishas of their disrespect, a formal apology delivered before both the divine and mortal realms. He demanded that Obatala himself must lead this apology, admitting that Shango's anger had been justified even if his response had been excessive. Furthermore, he insisted that Oshun must return with him, must stand by his side during his re-entry to the kingdom, making it clear that it was her intervention specifically that had brought him back. This last condition revealed something that Oshun had not fully anticipated, that Shango's feelings toward her had become as complicated as her own feelings toward him. He was not just agreeing to return out of duty or guilt, but partly because the thought of never seeing her again was suddenly unbearable. Oshun agreed to all his terms without hesitation. She knew the other Orishas would be furious at having to publicly apologize, that Obatala's pride would be wounded just as Shango's had been. But she also knew that pride was a small price to pay for the lives of thousands. She stood and extended her hand to Shango, sealing their agreement with a touch that sent electricity through both of them. Shango rose and began to prepare for the journey down the mountain. As he gathered his belongings and donned his ceremonial attire, red and white cloth that marked him as king, his double-headed axe that symbolized justice, Oshun watched him transform from an angry exile back into the magnificent ruler she knew he could be. Before they left, Shango turned to her with an expression that held equal parts gratitude and something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name. He told her that she had done something no warrior could accomplish, something no elder could achieve. She had reminded him who he was beneath the anger, beneath the pride, beneath the power. She had made him want to be better, not out of obligation, but out of desire. Desire to be worthy of the faith she had shown in him. The descent from the mountain was nothing like Oshun's climb up. Where she had traveled alone, now she walked beside a king. Where the path had been scorched and dead, now small shoots of green began to appear. And in the sky above them, for the first time in weeks, clouds began to gather. Not the angry storm clouds of Shango's rage, but the heavy, promising clouds that carried rain. The kingdom below stirred with hope as they saw those clouds forming, not yet knowing what they meant, but daring to believe that perhaps their prayers had finally been answered. The return to the kingdom was unlike anything the people had ever witnessed. Word spread like wildfire that Shango was coming back, that the goddess Oshun walked beside him, that the sky above them was heavy with the promise of rain. People poured out of their homes despite their weakness, lining the roads to catch a glimpse of their returning king. The other Orishas had gathered as Oshun had demanded, and though their faces showed reluctance and wounded pride, they stood ready to fulfill the conditions Shango had required. Obatala stepped forward, his white robes brilliant in the morning light, and spoke words that cost him dearly, but that he delivered with dignity. He acknowledged that Shango's contributions had been dismissed unfairly, that his anger had caused even if his actions had been extreme, and that the divine realm recognized his importance not just as a powerful god, but as a wise king. As the apology concluded, Shango raised his axe to the sky. Thunder rolled across the heavens, but this time it was not the thunder of anger. It was the thunder of proclamation, of celebration, of power being reclaimed and redirected toward protection rather than punishment. The clouds that had been gathering burst open, and rain fell on the kingdom for the first time in weeks. It was not a gentle rain, but a powerful downpour, as if the sky itself was weeping with relief. People tilted their faces upward, letting the water wash over them, drinking it in, laughing and crying simultaneously. Children danced in puddles that formed in the streets. Farmers fell to their knees in their fields, touching the wet earth with reverent hands. Throughout the city, the sound of celebration rose, drums beating, voices singing, a kingdom coming back to life. Shango walked through his capital with Oshun at his side, and the people cheered not just for their king, but for the goddess, who had saved them all. They threw yellow flowers at Oshun's feet, the color sacred to her, creating a golden path wherever she walked. As the celebration reached its height, Shango turned to address his people from the steps of his palace. His voice, amplified by his divine power, carried to every corner of the kingdom. He told them that he had been wrong to abandon them in his anger, that a king's duty transcended personal grievances, that he had been reminded of these truths by a goddess whose beauty was matched only by her wisdom and courage. He gestured to Oshun, and the crowd roared their approval and gratitude. But Oshun, standing beside the king as rain continued to fall around them, felt a complexity of emotions. She had succeeded in her mission. The kingdom was saved, the people would live, the crisis was averted. Yet something had changed during those hours on the mountain. What had begun as a seduction, a calculated plan to manipulate a king's desires, had become something real and unexpected. She had gone to Shango, intending to use his weaknesses against him. Instead, she had discovered strengths in him that matched her own, vulnerabilities that mirrored hers. The connection between them was no longer just a divine strategy, but something genuine and profound. The days following Shango's return transformed the kingdom in ways both expected and surprising. The rains continued, steady and nourishing, bringing life back to fields and filling rivers that had run dry. But beyond the physical restoration, something had shifted in the divine realm as well. Shango, once known primarily for his quick temper and devastating power, began to rule with a new dimension of wisdom. He consulted more, listened more, tempered his legendary pride with the kind of thoughtfulness that comes from having been humbled and redeemed. And through it all, Oshun remained close, not as a temporary solution to a crisis, but as a permanent presence in his life and rule. The other Orishes watched this development with mixed feelings. Some saw it as a beautiful partnership, the fierce god of thunder balanced by the fluid goddess of sweet waters. Others whispered that Oshun had used her beauty to manipulate events to her advantage, that she now held too much influence over a king known for his strength. But those who looked closely could see the truth was more complex than either interpretation. What had happened on that mountain was neither pure manipulation nor pure romance. It was something in between, something very human despite involving gods. Oshun had indeed used her beauty and her knowledge of desire to approach Shango, but she had also offered him genuine understanding and revealed her own authentic vulnerabilities. Shango had been seduced, certainly, but he had also been seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in his existence. The kingdom thrived under this new dynamic. Shango's strength and Oshun's wisdom complemented each other, creating a rule that was both powerful and compassionate. When drought threatened again years later, Shango no longer raged against the Orishes, but consulted with Oshun about solutions. When conflicts arose with neighboring kingdoms, Oshun's diplomatic skills prevented wars that Shango's temper might once have started. The people came to see them as inseparable, two aspects of divine power working in harmony. Stories spread throughout the Yoruba lands about the goddess who saved a kingdom through beauty and intelligence, about the king who learned that true strength included knowing when to yield. Parents told their children about Oshun's bravery in approaching an angry god, and about Shango's courage in admitting he had been wrong. Yet the relationship between the two remained complicated in ways that mortals could only guess at. There were moments of genuine tenderness between them, times when Shango looked at Oshun with unmistakable love, when Oshun touched his face with affection that went beyond strategy. But there were also moments of tension, Times when Shango wondered if her initial approach had been entirely honest, when Oshun questioned whether she had compromised too much of herself to achieve her goal. These complexities made their partnership not weaker, but stronger, more real, more resilient. They had both been changed by what happened on that mountain. Shango learning that vulnerability was not weakness. Oshun discovering that seduction could transform the seducer as much as the seduced. So what do you think? Did Oshun manipulate Shango with her beauty? Or did she genuinely touch his heart and change him for the better? Was this a story of divine manipulation or of two powerful beings finding unexpected connection? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. And if you found this tale of divine seduction and redemption as fascinating as I did, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because the next story will take you even deeper into the mysteries and passions of the Orishas. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, remember that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't thunder or lightning. It's the ability to truly see another soul and be brave enough to let them see yours.